you to join my live teleforum town hall event taking place in just a few moments. Please just stay on the line and you will be automatically connected. The call will focus on actions taken by the Trump administration during their first 3 weeks in office and what my colleagues and I are doing to address the concerns that have been raised by many of our constituents. Stay on the line and you'll have an opportunity to ask me questions throughout the call. If you have any questions after the event or if I can assist you in any way, you can call my office in Springfield at 413-785-0325. To be added to our do not call list, please press 9 now. Thank you very much for your time.
Please hold while we connect you to your Access Live event. The Access Live event is currently in music hold and will start momentarily. Please note this call may be monitored, recorded, or rebroadcast.
While we're waiting.
No, don't even start.
Okay.
I don't want to mess this up. I'll do 20 things at the same time.
I think my best bet here too is to lay low and see how it unfolds, and not expose.
Yep. I want a town meeting.
But my guess is you get ornery, they're just going to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to
That's the beauty of this. They can cut you off. At a real town hall,
This is where
at a real town hall, you can't get cut off.
And I had all of the election results in 2020 to show, listen, the Democratic Party's going down in Massachusetts.
Well, and are you for girls playing on, boys playing on girls' sports and going into their locker rooms?
Yeah.
Tell us where you are on this.
Because you would not provide us with answers. So,
There's no transparency. And that's why
I want him to hold a town meeting.
A real one.
Mansfield, Southwick, Tolland, Granville, our area. We were all strongly voted for Trump. Come and talk to us.
Address the concerns we've had for the past, I'd say, 16 years.
Welcome to this evening's live telephone town hall with Congressman Richard Neal, your representative for the 1st District of Massachusetts. My name is Jack, and I will be moderating this evening's conversation. In a few moments, we will be joined by Congressman Neal. But before we begin, I will explain what will happen during tonight's town hall. If you would like to ask Congressman Neal a question at any point during tonight's call, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's star 3. You will continue to hear the town hall until one of the Congressman's staff members can assist you. If you do not have the opportunity to ask your question during tonight's call, you can leave a voicemail for Congressman Neal and his staff at the end of the call simply by remaining on the line. If you would like to ask Congressman Neal a question, you can press star 3 now on your telephone keypad or at any point during tonight's call.
At any point.
With that, please welcome Congressman Neal.
Good evening, and thank you all for taking the time to participate in this teletown hall meeting. As we talk, I am staring at the dome of the Capitol here in the Cannon Building in my office in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to have a chance to speak to constituents back home in an effort to respond to what I think has been the chaotic nature of the decision-making that we've all witnessed now from the administration, the president. I think that we can be duly alarmed by the decision-making process, largely because I think the constitutional question that is involved here is the role of Congress. And that role, according to our Constitution, is not an advisory role. That is a Article 1 guarantee that Congress will oversee expenditure and accountability oversight of the administration. What I think has been bothersome to us and many of my colleagues has been the fact that there's been a usurpation of congressional authority in the effort to announce these edicts that may well have very little legal standing. But that does not deny the reality of the pain that has been caused to many individuals, whether it's at USAID, or whether it's at the NIH, or whether it's at the General Services Administration, or in fact threatens to Medicaid based upon the budget ceiling that we have witnessed today, which would call for substantial cuts to Medicaid, which, as you know, Medicaid, when President Johnson signed the Medicaid Act, after he had signed the Medicare Act, the idea was to offer medical care for low-income people. Today, there are 71 million Americans that draw or derive a benefit from Medicaid. In fact, in many of the red states, it is the primary source of health care for millions of Americans. All of this is being done today. If you have a chance online this evening, or certainly by tomorrow morning, all of this is being done to provide an avenue to maintain substantial tax cuts for people who aren't even asking for them at the very top of our economic system. So the numbers look like this. The proposal is $4 trillion borrowed over the next 10 years, borrowed for the purpose of tax cuts for wealthy people.
No, sir.
And again, when you hear and look at distribution tables, the argument that everybody's getting a tax cut might be true, but the more effective argument is
The
who's
wealthy
getting
people are
what.
Democrats.
And these tax cuts that have been embraced also simultaneously have created an echo suggesting that somehow this doesn't affect the budget debt, when in fact everybody knows that it does. So the budget ceiling proposal that is being offered is again north of $4 trillion over the next 2 years. And that in and of itself is a substantial increase in the debt ceiling, more than what I've witnessed during my time here in this period for a relationship to debt and deficits. The one that I think I want to emphasize, if I can, for the next few minutes, that is bothersome to all of us, it's been the infiltration of the Treasury's payment system, which, as you know, contains a broad swath of taxpayer data, including taxpayer names, addresses, Social Security numbers, and the amount of tax refunds, all of which is confidential. It also contains enormous amounts of information and data as it relates to Social Security payments, Medicare payments, Medicaid payments. And in the federal payment system, it's noteworthy that the Inspector Generals, 13 of whom have been fired in the last few days, while those who are unelected have had a chance to sift through this very confidential data. And why do I call it confidential data? There are various parts to Social Security. There is, of course, the old age benefit, the pension. There is also the disability income that comes with Social Security. And there is the medical side of Social Security in terms of payments. That is confidential information. And as it goes to Medicare, the payment system, remember that there are 4 parts to Medicare, including Medicare Part D. In Medicare Part D, that is the prescription drug issue. I don't think people ought to have access from the unelected who are sifting through these documents, including a 19-year-old and a 25-year-old, having this information at their fingertips. I think that privacy is next to liberty as it relates to health care. I used the example just a week or so ago, and I pointed out that why should somebody who has a serious ailment, is being treated with medication, have a threat of having that medication exposed? Again, this is confidential information. The unelected, including Elon Musk, who has been pouring through this information, they've done this in a very arbitrary manner. I think it violates the Constitution. When people file this information, it is sensitive and they deserve assurance that their data is protected and confidential. The other issue that I thought is noteworthy and really critical, Congress does not serve under a president of the United States. I need and you need to have our colleagues on the other side of the aisle begin to challenge some of these edicts that are coming from the administration. It's almost like an oath of silence. And if they privately discuss it with you, they know that this is problematic. But publicly, they are reluctant to talk about what is happening, even though they know that this privacy issue is substantial. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court made it clear, President Nixon at the time, that Congress had the obligation of expenditure. And in fact, if you look back at that decision, President Nixon impounded federal dollars, saying that he did not have to spend them as the executive. The Supreme Court said it was the responsibility of Congress to make those allocations. Presidents might advise Congress on those allocations, but it was Congress in the end that would make that determination. So right now, even as we speak, millions of dollars that have been dutifully authorized and appropriated by Congress for initiatives back home, they are being threatened because of this theory of presidential unitary action and impoundment. We have these decisions. I was very instrumental in writing what is known as the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a very important piece of legislation. It came through the Ways and Means Committee during my time as chairman. And that piece of legislation has already inured to the benefit of the people of the 1st Congressional District. I think that when you examine this impoundment or pause, as the president has called it, what it does is it's an effort to intimidate the legislative branch of government into moving away from their constitutional responsibility. Again, in the last 48 hours, the president has indicated that they intend to freeze NIH dollars, National Institutes of Health. That's astounding. The University of Massachusetts alone has received $175 million over the last 5 years. The medical school at UMass Worcester, $975 million over the last 5 years. Springfield College, Mount Holyoke College, Williams College, and Western New England University have all been beneficiaries of NIH spending, as has Bay State Health. The other number that I want to give you that I think is consistent with the great work that NIH does is the breakthroughs that we've had in terms of medical advancement. If an individual were diagnosed in the 1950s with leukemia, it was a really grim determination. Today, because of the investments that we've made in NIH, the investments that we've made in innovation, and understanding that in Massachusetts, we're the epicenter of this research at our great universities, our great hospitals, that we made these advancements so that a diagnosis of leukemia today would be treated. These are the advances that have been made, whether it was in polio research, measles, all of this, in many ways was financed by the American taxpayer. I'm not arguing this evening that we should not take a look at fraud. What I am saying is, if there is fraud as suggested by these unelected officials around the president, then in fact they should tell us where it is.
There are
I
times.
know that in Medicare, for example, that I believe that there is fraud. Whether or not it's far-reaching, we should examine that, as I have suggested in the past. However, that's very different than suggesting that you know there's fraud, but never mentioning where you've discovered it. Taking a wood chipper to some of these expenditures, as was suggested by Elon Musk, again, an unelected individual who is making these determinations. So our Attorney General, Campbell, she has succeeded in blocking the president's decision in Massachusetts so far to cut NIH funding. You can be sure that they are going to be back to that in no time at all.
I hope so.
Just a few more points that I want to make about privacy, as I noted a few minutes ago. The courts have again and again determined that a president's power is not unchecked. They don't have a right to go through personal information at our data centers as it relates to our payment system for information that relates to Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, Medicaid, or these other initiatives that Americans depend on every day. These are programs that benefit our families, the elderly, and even a threat to some veterans benefits. We've spent time here in the last few days pushing back against this notion
Just
that
can't
you
bring
can freeze
speeches in the
Medicaid,
town
you can
hall.
freeze Head Start, you can freeze some veterans organizations without any congressional authorization. I intend to continue to fight against that. It's clear to me that this is not thought through, but it draws considerable attention to our healthcare system,
It's
and it is in
By
fact
the
quite
way.
disturbing. So let me just go through a couple of more issues that I think are important here, and we'll take some time so that we can get a couple of questions in from you.
Couple of questions.
Anyone who's been following my career, you know that I have been an advocate and unwavering in my support of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
When was the last time
Social
you had a
Security is
town
the
meeting?
basis of our nation's retirement system. Get this number. The average Social Security benefit is $1,976 a month, or $24,000 a year. What that means is that half the people who receive Social Security receive less than $24,000 a year. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act, every child in Massachusetts has health insurance. Let me repeat that. Every child in Massachusetts has health insurance, as do 97% of the adults. 183,000 people in our district, they depend on Medicaid.
Does it go on the work?
64,000 children and 18,000 seniors over the age of 65 derive that benefit. The idea that we're going to give a tax cut to the top 2% of the American family at the expense of these initiatives, raise the debt ceiling in an arbitrary manner so that we can borrow more money for tax cuts, and then say that we need to cut health care to pay for all of it is irresponsible and indeed reckless. So I'm hopeful that pressure from citizenry will continue to stand with us, but also to understand that we have filed 56 lawsuits just during the last 3 weeks. 56 lawsuits. And I think public demonstration of opposition is going to be very, very important going forward. But we also should not be limiting it to people who you already agree with. We should also be calling it to the attention of those who have already embraced or at least been sitting on the sidelines while they await direction from the president as to how they should go forward. I think that the president, he has said he is not going to defy court orders. Elon Musk and others have said they would defy court orders. Recall that the courts can't save Congress from doing its job, but they certainly can be very helpful. I hope you're going to continue to write letters, offer email
The Access Live event operator has been notified that you wish to ask a question.
hearings that we're going to have a chance to compel them to do when they lay out this budget scenario in the next couple of weeks, that people should take a very good look at it. Just a couple of quick reminders.
I have other questions. Go. If you can. Well, you don't have a choice when you come up.
On January 19th of 2021, when Bill Clinton left, we were staring at trillions of dollars of surplus. Trillions of dollars. So in 2001, there was a tax cut of $1.3 trillion, and then in 2003, another $1 trillion. A war in Iraq, which you know I opposed, and 1 million new veterans, which we should obligated to care for, and also in pandemic relief. That was almost $8 trillion that came of that. But The Economist magazine has pointed out clearly that the American economy is the envy of the world. I call attention to this because I don't understand why this concocted effort is being made now to cut health care for people who really need it, or propose to cut this health care, $1.2 trillion by the official number that I saw today, while simultaneously
Just
arguing
wanted to hold the
that the
town
debt is
meeting.
too high, and then saying it's okay to authorize $4 trillion worth of tax cuts over the next 10 years. So this strikes me as being inconsistent and irresponsible, but also the other part of this that I think is essential to remember is the following. Congress is not subservient to any president. We should be continuing to demand that these individuals step forward and explain these positions that they've taken over this period of time and what they feel is their constitutional responsibility to ignore the wishes of the American people. Instead, they should be granting hearings, and we should be talking about this issue and issues in full public view.
Oh,
I hope that you're going to have a chance to ask a couple of questions here. And if you could, identify yourself and ask the questions as they come through. We will try our best to answer them. But I think that we need to be very clear as to what's happening and what has happened in this chaotic 3 weeks that we witnessed, where it's edict upon edict, very few of which have anything to do with law.
what would they know about law?
Thank you, Congressman. Just a reminder for anyone who has recently joined the call, if you would like to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's *3 to ask the Congressman a question. And with that, let's turn to our first question. Our first question comes from Teresa in Webster. Teresa has a question about Doge. Teresa, you are live with the Congressman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. My question is, I've been listening ever since January and before that, and I'm hearing all these big claims of fraud, abuse, the whole 9 yards, but I've seen no evidence. They've brought forth no specifics on what exactly is fraudulent or abused. I can't believe that there's fraud and abuse unless I see it with my own eyes.
Have you not been watching the news?
Well, as you know, it's an open. Please continue. Yep.
I mean, if you brought that to court, which most of the time you would if you ran into fraud or abuse, the judge wouldn't even hear you unless you had actual evidence that you could hand and show where the fraud, where the abuse is.
Well, as long as I can, at this work, I can tell you that a favored position of those who oppose any sort of government spending is always to say that it's about waste, fraud, and abuse. That's, in many instances, that's where they start the conversation. And part of that becomes, if not carefully authorized, and as you've indicated, Teresa, with some demonstrable evidence, then if they name fraud, they should tell us where it is.
They have
There's
been.
ample opportunity, as I have suggested in the past. That's what the U.S. Attorney's offices are for. If there's a fraud allegation that's made in Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or whatever, these initiatives, right now those
Oh my God, slow down.
they're pushing back on those
No,
who
this is
might
for
have,
you.
used a lot of questionable information as it related to pandemic relief funds. We're at that. We're going to get that back. And that was, as you said, that was acknowledged that it had happened and the charges had been made. And they continue to do their work. But in these other instances, all of a sudden, as it relates, for example, to the Consumer Protection Board, the argument is simply made
But they
that
will.
we are putting
You won't
in the
get through.
wood chipper. I mean, that means that we're going to lift regulations on banks and others. And look, we all remember what happened in 2008. That was fraud, but it was from bankers and others who were selling phony securities, and it plunged the nation into an economic peril. That was not Social Security, that was not Medicare that did that, and it wasn't Medicaid. So I think your position is sound, and I agree with you. If you have evidence of fraud in any of these federal initiatives, step forward with it. We're happy to hear you, and we will certainly act upon the request. So thanks. I'm glad to hear from Webster. I know many people out there call it Webster. And thanks for calling in.
Thank you. And just a reminder again, if anyone would like to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3 on your phone keypad. Next, we have Dolores from Richmond.
I should have
Dolores,
done it right
you
away.
are live with the Congressman.
I should have hit *3 right away. I bet you a lot of people
so
did.
happy
Oh,
to
yeah.
be speaking with you tonight. I'm nearly 80 and I have a daughter with different abilities living in a group home. And I'm worried about her because she is dependent on Medicare,
Oh, this is
Medicaid,
bogus.
net benefits. What happens to our children with different abilities? Who's going to care for them? I can take her home. She runs faster than I do.
She what?
Runs fast.
Thanks for the call and thanks for the question, Dolores. If I can ask you, does she receive a Social Security disability benefit? Well, perhaps we lost raised in the last 15 minutes or so. These initiatives are really important to people like you, Dolores, and your family. And it would be almost impossible for you to care for an individual without that assistance from the federal government. The federal government here, as I noted before, these are not huge numbers for individuals, but they are of the difference for many, many families. So on the Social Security disability side, as you noted, on the Medicare side, or on the Medicaid side, these initiatives benefit the American people. And again, I think what galls me the most is the argument is being made that we should cut taxes for people who, as I said earlier, haven't even asked for a tax cut. They're doing well. And the president, as you understand, he wants to expand these tax cuts permanently and then say that we have to come back and cut many of the benefits that families like yours, Dolores, depend upon. So thanks for the call, and I think that this has not been well thought out by the administration. And again, the unelected should not be making that determination.
Like the elected have done a good job.
Thank you. Another reminder, again, if anyone wants to ask a question, please press *3 on your keypad. Next.
You have already been placed into the question and answer queue. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press 1 to confirm or 2 to cancel. You have not been removed from the question queue.
I had a technical difficulty trying to get my phone out of my pocket.
That happens to me 5 times a day, so.
Oh, God. Well, good. I'm in good company. I'm just curious. There seem to be a lot of breaches against the Constitution, specifically with Doge and Elon Musk.
Yep.
And is there anything that Congress can or is planning to do to stop him?
Yes, we want him now, and the people around him with Doge, we want them to testify in front of the Ways and Means Committee. They are resisting. If their position is as sound as they say it is, then they simply have to come in front of the Ways and Means Committee in Congress or the Energy and Commerce Committee, and they should lay out their thoughts and plans so that the public might inspect them and examine them, and then we could have a conversation about their priorities. I think anybody who saw that press conference even yesterday, where Elon Musk is standing there making all these assertions without offering one shred of evidence and a reminder, who voted for him to make these suggestions. I also will say that we requested yesterday in a markup that we had in the committee, we want to know when they intend to set a date. Now, the new Secretary of the Treasury, Bissett, he will come before the Ways and Means Committee eventually, because the Ways and Means Committee oversees Treasury. And I can guarantee you, I intend to ask him about why he decided to turn the information and data over to our payment from our payment system to individuals who have no portfolio. Part of democracy is accountability. You come and explain yourself, and then you stand before the public
that was a doozy.
and pass judgment on it. So I think in this case here, you're absolutely correct that this constitutional challenge that they've offered is likely to be settled in the federal courts, or if they come to their senses and begin to answer some questions in front of these
The
respective
nation's coming to
committees,
its senses,
then
Richard.
the public will have their chance to examine what has been said and, in fact, what Congress decides to do. I think this is a very precarious time, and I'm ever so hopeful that during the next few weeks that these individuals will accept their responsibility or
Oh my God, look at what Taylor's
come
daughter
before
did.
Congress and explain
She cut her
what
own
it is
hair.
that they intend to do.
Our next question comes from Russell in Lanesboro. Russell, you are live with the Congressman.
Good evening, Congressman. As ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee, what do you do and what will you do to fight back against the huge tax cut that the Republicans are planning? I know you've talked about it some, but...
Well, I intend to raise the roof about it and continue to. I have pointed out today that what always happens with these tax cut proposals, and since my time here, is the following. That there's an argument about the tax cut, then the money on the tax cut is offered, and then they say we're going to cut spending, but they never get around to the cutting of the spending. because it doesn't square with the tax cut proposals that they have. So the point that I raise is that 25 years ago, when Bill Clinton left, we had balanced the budget 4 times in a row. And Bill Clinton had a tax increase and some spending cuts. And then the money in those tax cuts of 201 and 203, 2 wars, and the collapse of Wall Street, that was the end of the surpluses. And as anybody knows in their own affairs of their home, that you save money for the rainy day. So their argument here is that we can complain about the debt, offer more deficits, and then say in the next breath that tax cuts pay for themselves. That's preposterous. There isn't anybody who believes that here. And they're saying that they can speed up growth. There is no evidence that that's going to happen either. The GAO and others, they have projected that growth is going to be in the vicinity of 2.3 to 2.5% for the next 3 or 4 years. That's a likely number.
This looks
That
staged.
will not generate enough income to pay for their tax cuts. Their tax cuts will total more than $4 trillion over 10 years. Also, reference point, because I'm glad you raised it. You can see that I'm pretty charged up about these proposals.
Oh, yeah, touched.
So in 2017, December of 2017, with their tax cut, remember this, and this is not a debatable point. It happened. They borrowed $2.33 trillion for the tax cut. Borrowed it. Said it was going to create enormous economic growth. It didn't. So we're stuck with the debt and the deficits. And remember, the debt is the accumulation of deficits. And then the argument becomes, well, we've got to do something about the debt. And their answer is, well, let's cut taxes more or make the president's tax cuts permanent. Take a look, if they have a chance, at the distribution tables that I referenced earlier. And the distribution tables are just that. They say and lay out who is going to get what from these tax cuts. And my argument is that people at the very top are going to get these tax cuts. Remember, we went from 39.6 on the individual side, those were Clinton and Obama rates, to 37% now. And then on the cap gain side, they went to 28%. And on the corporate side, they went from 35 to 21%. The president has said, well, maybe if we go to 15%, that'll be better. I think that there are people that need Medicaid, they need Medicare, they need Social Security, they need these nutrition programs, and every single day they depend on them, as we heard earlier this evening from the caller from Richmond. And I hope and anticipate that we will be able to steer them down, get them to answer some questions, and push back hard against their tax cuts. And that can be done legislatively. We don't have to wait for a court decision on that.
Our next question comes from William in Longmeadow. William, you are live with the congressman.
Good evening, Congressman Neal. This is Bill Fonseca calling.
Hi, Bill.
And my question is, at the end of the Biden administration, he signed the windfall provision for Social Security for full payment.
Right.
Do you have any idea when that will be funded?
Well, it should be funded now. I think what Social Security is doing, they're just going through the data, that's all. As you know, I worked hard on that for 20 years. I was quite pleased. I was at the White House with the president. He singled me out in front of everybody by name, asked me to stand. And I stayed with that argument. If you recall on the windfall elimination issue, that there were people in 8 states who had paid in the necessary quarters to Social Security. But because they had worked in another government capacity, because public employees in Massachusetts don't contribute to Social Security, that doesn't mean that they didn't contribute to Social Security at different points of their lives.
That's right.
They in fact did.
That's
so the
right, I
question
did.
for Social Security is, did you put in the necessary quarters? And they did. So we were able, after all these years, as I said, I filed my first bill, I think 20 years ago, filed it every single year afterwards, defended the process, and was delighted to vote for it, and very pleased that Joe Biden indicated that he would sign it. So what I would suggest is you might want to call my Pittsfield office or call the Springfield office. They're on top of this, and the benefit will be forthcoming. Thanks for your patience on it.
Our next question Craig in Wilbraham. Craig, you are live with the Congressman.
Yes, good evening, Congressman Neal. Thank you for taking the question. My question is as follows. It appears that all of these executive orders are not really standing up to the rule of law and constitutionality. And what I'm wondering about is if the administration chooses to flout the authority of the courts, what path can Congress take? And move towards a full Congress, a constitutional crisis.
Well, I think that certainly could happen. I'm hopeful that it won't. I think that federal judges, like members of Congress, they don't serve under presidents. And I hope that they will just restate what we talked about this evening, and that is the constitutional obligation of congressional oversight. And I think that if Congress says that you can't do these things, or Congress has already appropriated the money, then in fact, I think it's a clear constitutional issue. Remember that on the Supreme Court, we've had some fascinating decisions, many of which I might have disagreed with, but some that I did agree with. And I hope that the Supreme Court of the United States, which I had a case in front of, and I prevailed, I hope that the Supreme Court will answer the call of history and responsibility and point out that these decisions that are being made are arbitrary. And they're not subject to review. That's nonsense. They should be subject to review. So the other part of
Like
this
men in the
that might
ladies'
be of
locker rooms.
interest is that clearly what the courts can do, because the U.S. Marshal Service works for the executive, so there would be a question as to what the U.S. Marshals could do. But the federal courts have the ability to place enormous fines on those they believe to be in contempt of federal court decisions. So I'm watching this very carefully. I think that some judges have already stepped forward. I was very pleased with a Republican judge. And I should even have to
93
describe it that way.
prosecutors this morning.
It should be just a federal judge, but more and more attention is drawn to the appointing authority.
Trump
And
fired
a
93
judge
prosecutors
in
this
Oregon,
morning.
who was named by Ronald Reagan, he did birthright and made it out very clear.
Looks like it's getting worse.
So I think that we should be mindful, and we certainly have to be careful. We want to make sure that there is no
This guy shits out his mouth like a pro.
denial of the responsibility that Congress and the federal courts have to push back on executive authority, to review executive authority. And I have said many, many times, and I'll say it again, much of this started with Magna Carta in 1215. This is not a new concept. We have a presidential that is subject always to review every 4 years. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Peter in Holland. Peter, you are live with the Congressman.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Congressman Neal. I appreciate it. I guess I'm concerned that there's been talk about maybe cutbacks on Social Security, and the other side of the table calling Social Security an entitlement when we've put in our whole lives, and
This
just
is
wondering
bogus.
your thoughts and
I
what
don't
we
have
may
patience
be
for
able to
hardly
do
anymore.
to protect our Social Security
I want to keep
benefits.
recording though for Nadia.
Great question. So this year, I believe, represents the 90th birthday of Social Security from the time that Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. And I don't have to tell people who are on the call tonight what a difference that made in the lives of the American family. I knew that firsthand. In addition to which, with Medicare, we are now on the 60th anniversary of when Lyndon Johnson signed an amendment to the Social Security Act called Medicare. It was transformative. You're absolutely right in what you pointed out. Social Security is an earned benefit. Even as a young man, like yourself at one time,
Oh boy, she's
when you
on
were
fire
16 years
now.
old and perhaps took your first summer job,
Damn right it is.
there was
Damn
the
right it is.
withholding, a simple four-letter term that said FICA.
Earned benefit for
None
U.S.
of us at the
citizens.
time really knew what it meant. But FICA was the Social
That's-
Security and
yes.
Medicare tax. You, like millions of other Americans, have paid for it. Let me give you another number that I think is essential here. Social Security is far more efficient than any private retirement plan. Not that we don't need private retirement plans, we sure do. But the number of people who administer Social Security, in terms of proportionality, is far fewer than those who administer private retirement plans. If you have ever a problem with a Social Security check and you call your congressional office, they will track down that check. They will track down the benefit. And Social Security, as is always the case, will make good on it. I also, because I've had this long-standing interest in Social Security, the other part of it I think that's really important is that there's been this argument. A lot of young people, unfortunately, have embraced it. You will hear people say, well, Social Security's not going to be there
That's right.
when I'm ready for it. Of course it is. And we will never back away from Social Security. That's a guarantee. And every time that there's ever been an actuarial challenge to Social Security, Congress has fixed it. If you go back to Reagan and O'Neal, they fixed it. In Roosevelt's term, he fixed it. And we will fix it again. And I think that's important because I don't think people should be misled. And I will also say to a lot of young people when they point out, well, maybe I'm not going to get it, I always say to them, just remember, the reason your mother and father are not living in your attic is because of Social Security and Medicare. Great call, great question.
Our next question comes from Mark. And Mark, you are live with the congressman.
Thank you, Congressman Neal. I appreciate you taking my question. There should be no confusion that the stakes that are taking place now in America under Trump's leadership, if you want to call it that, and the world's richest man, it's a dismantling of the administrative state, brick by brick, and those institutions that millions of Americans rely upon. My concern is it appears that the rapidity of how this is occurring and the response with respect to how we're addressing this is not adequate. You had mentioned efforts to look at lawsuits. I think those are helpful, and there's some 55 lawsuits. There needs to be more of a concerted effort to basically put sand in the gears to slow this down, to try to bring back the constitutional rights under Article 1. My concern really is, there's leverage that can be had, perhaps through the budget reconciliation process, where we know Republicans are not necessarily going to be voting for some of that, and there's going to be a need for bipartisan support. It seems to me that we need to look at using that legislative leverage to kind of bring a governor onto this effort to heal basically some of Trump's initiatives. So I'm curious what some of your thoughts are in terms of how using that process could arrive at some of that outcome.
So reconciliation is an issue that comes before the Ways and Means Committee. I intend to oppose it. And I intend to be very vocal in my opposition to it. You're right. The challenge is what happened with reconciliation since it was first proposed in 1976 in the Budget Act. Reconciliation was supposed to be a simple process where sometime during a legislative year, as the term implies, you would reconcile revenue with expenditure. Then it became used to justify substantial tax cuts. And I intend, as I've noted before, to oppose it. I intend to push back hard on the reconciliation package that we're likely to see in the next 10 days or so, what they intend to do with it. And the other item here that I think is really important, I have not had any of our Republican colleagues yet stand up and say they intend to oppose any of this. All we need is a hint.
Hi, this is Abby with Congressman Neal South. Can I get your name and where you're calling from tonight?
Yes, hello. My name is Maurice, and I'm calling from Westfield.
Maurice, what's your question for the congressman this evening?
I really wanted to talk more to. Oh, you kind of caught me off guard. I'm sorry. I'm a little flustered. I didn't think I would get on. So, listening to other people, I think I kind of want to change my question. My first question was, how we can look to secure monies through the NIH for Mass General, where my father received care, and was fortunate enough we were able to have him for another 15 years because of their ability to treat his cancer. But then the whole thing about Social Security kind of came up. So I think that what I'd really like to ask, though, is how we can secure these monies that are coming through NIH. Massachusetts has always been, such a top leadership role, in breakthrough medical, that we just need to be able to secure that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. That's a great question. I am going to log this here for you, and I'm going to send you back into the call just so you can listen to the congressman, and be sure to keep your ears peeled in case they ask it you live.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. You have a great rest of your night.
You as well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
I still think really a maybe.
Yeah, so they're putting
The situation is ongoing.
Well, don't limit your phone calls just to Democrats. I mean, we're pretty much in unison on all of this, but I think that you also want to figure out how we might reach it from Linux, of course. You can certainly make your views known to those in New York who are Republicans who haven't made up their minds yet. And I think that the issue here is that I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, this is a very different time than even when Reagan was president for them. They resisted centralized authority when Reagan was president. They embraced the principles of trade. They also were for balanced budgets and not borrowing money for tax cuts. And they certainly weren't talking about changing Medicare or Social Security. So I think making your voice clear to people, not just, again, the Democrats, I'm on your side on this, and most independents are. And I think our position here is to go after what we call the persuadables on the Republican side, because they receive Social Security, they receive Medicare, they receive Medicaid, and I think they would be unhappy that the administration is sifting through these very personal documents inside of the Treasury Department, which are off limits as far as I'm concerned to the unelected.
Thank you, Congressman. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions. If you did not have the opportunity to ask your question during tonight's call, you can leave a voicemail for Congressman Neal and his staff at the end of the call simply by remaining on the line. With that, I will turn it back over to the Congressman for some closing remarks.
So I want to thank you all for taking the time tonight. There's still snow on the ground here in Washington. The dome of the Capitol, as I noted at the beginning, is lit, is magnificent. It's one of the rich symbols of America. I understand that democracy is supposed to be noisy. The First Amendment guarantees a second opinion. But I also think that what is being suggested here and proposed needs to be resisted. And we need to push back on those who would change Medicaid, threaten personal data, as the first caller said, I think it might have been Dolores, about her daughter, who I assume receives, she said Medicare, Medicaid, and I'm assuming based on that she probably receives a Social Security disability benefit. Let me tell you, nobody's getting rich on these initiatives, but they do provide for people a guarantee of some economic security. And the idea that people who now populate the administration, who are billionaires, they might not understand that the way we do. So stay with this, continue to have your voices heard. And again, as I close, I'm glancing right over at that dome. It means something to me, and I know it means something to you. And we're going to stand together to push back on these ill-conceived proposals that we're witnessing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Again, if folks want to leave their questions, you can do so by remaining on the line, and you will be automatically connected to the voicemail system. Thank you for joining us this evening.